activities and best practices for your companies and HR departments. With the help of the Creators Wanted Fund, we'll work to identify and eliminate barriers to diversity and inclusion, and we'll recruit a talented workforce to lead us into the future.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's Diversity Inclusion Roundtable on Neurodifferences. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. We will be recording this webinar and we'll share a link with all registrants after the event. All participants' microphones have been muted upon entering the meeting. Make sure you are using the speaker video layout, which can be found at the top right-hand corner of your screen and will automatically spotlight active speakers. If you're able, please turn your video on so that we can with the audience. And lastly, there is a chat feature which can be accessed from the bottom of your screen, where we encourage you to post discussions and resources to supplement today's conversation. If you have any questions for the panel, please feel free to post in the chat. And without further ado, I'd now like to introduce AJ Jorgensen, Vice President of Strategic Engagement at the Manufacturing Institute.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today for a very important discussion. So I'm AJ Jorgensen, the Vice President of Strategic Engagement at the Manufacturing Institute. And today we're going to have a discussion on Neurodifferent and employing and recruiting and retaining employees with neurodifferences. So for context, there are currently 6.5 million individuals in the US with an intellectual or developmental difference. Research has shown time and time again that when employed, these individuals bring benefits to the employer, including increased employee morale, positive impacts to the company's bottom line, increased ROI. And yet, despite these facts, over 80% of individuals with a developmental or intellectual difference are unemployed. And 36% of survey respondents often say that they believe these individuals can be leaders in the workplace. So we have a disconnect between what we're seeing, the data shows, and the perception. And so today, as part of our D&I Roundtable series, I am honored to be joined by our colleagues from Autism Speaks, Special Olympics, Spectrum Designs, and Stanley Black & Decker. So first off, I would love for our panelists to introduce themselves. And Anne, I will start with you. If you can give us just your name and title, and then we'll jump in later for a deeper dive.
Okay. My name is Anne Grego-Nagel. I am the Human Factors Specialist at Autism Speaks.
And David?
Hi, everyone. My name is Dave Kieran, and I'm the Director of Adult Services at Autism Speaks. Thanks for having us, AJ.
Absolutely. And Emily?
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Klinger, and I'm the Senior Director for our Global Leadership and Organizational Development at Special Olympics International.
All right. And I'm going to have Patrick. Patrick, if you want to introduce yourself too, we'll do this again, but.
Okay, yes, hello everyone, I'm Patrick Bardsley. I'm co-founder and CEO of Spectrum Designs.
And Tracy.
Hi everyone, thanks for inviting us here today. I'm Tracy Gilday, Chief Marketing Officer at Stanley Black & Decker.
As you can see, we have an amazing array of individuals, and I think this will be a great discussion. But so the first thing I want to do is I want to dive into what does neurodifferent mean and why is neurodiversity important? So give me the 101. So if I can ask David or Anne or Emily, give me the 101 on what neurodiversity means and why is it important?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a first crack at it. And I'd love to hear Emily and especially Anne. I think Anne's voice is perhaps most important today. You'll hear why when she speaks next, I think. But my sense of the term neurodiversity is it's a really interesting term. It's been, I think, kind of built into almost a political movement at the moment too. If you're interested, you can read up on it. But in my mind, it's a way to get us away from the old, what we call the medical model of disability, where you are defined by what you cannot do, right? So for autism, we're looking at deficits in communication or in social interaction. So you can't do this well, so you are therefore autistic. The neurodiversity model is more about celebrating, these are simply differences. These are just part of the normal variation that we see in the human population. that they should be celebrated instead of criticized or corrected. And I think it leads to really interesting discussions about, look, we're talking about people who have been at least traditionally defined by their disability. But we're talking here today about the strengths they can bring to your company. We're not here talking about, what Stanley Black & Decker can do for people with disabilities. We're saying, look, people with disabilities can really help Stanley Black & Decker. So it becomes this interesting discussion about, like, we can use autism as the example. Is it a disability, or is it simply a difference or an advantage at times? Or is it somewhere in the middle, like a disorder? And I think it can be all three within the same person, depending on the context and depending on how much support they're getting. So that's my attempt. I hope I didn't confuse more with that description, but can I kick it to Anne or Emily?
Fine, I'm going to go ahead and sort of step in here, Dave. I want to believe that Dave was talking about my voice should be heard because I am actually trained to be an industrial engineer. Okay, as a kid, I was drawn to systems that build things. So manufacturing systems are extremely exciting to me. But I work at Autism Speaks. Because I can use that background of a human factors engineer, also because I have autism. I was diagnosed as an adult as someone on the spectrum. And what that really means is that my brain is wired a little differently than the typical populations, okay? And that's part of the variation within the population that is sort of exciting. I process information differently. I process noise, sound, light, a whole lot of other perceptions, maybe a little differently than you might. I might not process them at all, and other things I might overprocess. I might be very reactive to. I might communicate a little different. I might have, different movement issues, things. And all of that is sort of what goes into neurodiversity. Neurodiversity really comes down to, when I'm just explaining, our brains are wired very differently. We're just beginning to understand the brain. The brain is so complex and so amazingly interesting, but we're just beginning really to understand how its wiring affects not only our behavior, but how we navigate the world. So I'm going to pass on to Emily, who.
Sure. Thanks, Anne and Dave. And just building off of Dave's comment about the social model and thinking about whether people who are neurodiverse, whether it's a disability. And I have the fortunate opportunity to lead a team of people who have an intellectual developmental disability or who are neurodifferent. And I was discussing with them, just as we do every day, but one thing I asked them about in preparation for this discussion is to describe to me how they think of neurodifference. And none of them use the word disability. And frankly, none of them use the word ability. One of the things that one of the individuals said is that everyone has differences, but not everybody's labeled by society as being different. And in our case, and he was saying this as someone who's neurodifferent, is I am labeled that, and unfortunately, oftentimes labeled as someone with a disability. But in reality, we have a unique set of abilities to offer, just like you would hope in any employment, any organization, you bring lots of different experiences. I think people who are neurodifferent bring those as well. And that's a value added. That's something that's unique to them, just as much as anyone else who's diverse. So I thought that was really an interesting way to think about it, is we all have differences, we just don't all know them and we're not labeled them. But those differences really bring a lot of value to organizations.
If I could add, sorry, one thing that Emily mentioned, there's an interesting article and some studies on this if you wanted to look it up in the Harvard Business Review, but about what makes the most innovative problem-solving teams. And the makeup, they tried, all right, let's mix up gender, let's mix like educational attainment, where people are from, political philosophies. None of those things really made a difference. Those teams performed pretty much the same. The teams that did best were teams that were intentionally put together because they were cognitively different. People who solve problems differently, people who approach the world differently. We all need to stop hiring the guys from your old college who went, who were part of the same fraternity. That's how we've gotten into some of the trouble that we're in now. Hire people intentionally because they think differently than you do, because they're neurologically different. And I think that's what we're talking about today.
I will say, I love, yeah, please.
Oh, all I was going to say too is that since I originally come out of the world of industrial engineering and manufacturing systems, I view it a little differently because I also know what plant life is like. And let me tell you, manufacturing is worlds ahead of being able to take advantage and to really integrate neurodiversity and neurodifferent people into its systems better than a lot of other systems. So I'm really excited about the opportunities that manufacturing alone offers, and also can really offer to neurodifferent people. So
I love this conversation because when we talk to manufacturers, that is the number one thing we hear is innovation. And that's what keeps jumping out to me from everything you've already discussed is we're all different, and therefore that processing information differently just adds that level of innovation that is possible when you bring neurodifferences into a team. But you made the perfect segue to our manufacturing representatives. So Patrick, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your company so we can give some context for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again so much for having us. So Spectrum Designs was co-founded 10 years ago by myself and two parents of individuals on the autism spectrum who were looking at kind of the future for their children and saying, you know, what are we going to do? And we wanted to create employment opportunities. So we were looking at kind of recession-proof businesses, and the custom apparel, printing, and t-shirt business was one that jumped out at us. So we knew that there was room for creativity and artistic tasks, as well as repetition and very concrete steps. So we do screen printed t-shirts, embroidery, hats. We printed for large corporations and private businesses. And we have over 30 neurodiverse employees here in New York, and just opened a second location in Westchester, printing thousands of items a day across 2 locations and tens of thousands of square feet. I think it's a great opportunity to talk about the unique skill set that we have. We started it with a mission and a purpose, but what we found, and I guess we kind of knew, was that we've got some of the best employees in the world, and for exactly the reasons we're talking about here. So I'm looking forward to diving into that a little bit more as we go.
And Tracy.
So from Stanley Black & Decker, you probably know us as a maker of hand tools and power tools, and we are fortunate to have some of the best brands in the world. We also have a division that is security solutions, healthcare solutions, automatic doors. Many of the automatic doors that you walk through in major retailers across the US are our doors. We have an infrastructure, industrial, and engineered fastening group. So many of the fasteners that are used in the car that you drive are fasteners that we make, as an example. Our purpose in our organization is for those who make the world, and we're very much about empowering the next generation of makers, and diversity is a huge part of our strategy. I have the great privilege and honor of leading our abilities ERG. So we're focused on supporting families of, caregivers of, as well as employees with visible and invisible disabilities and special abilities. And I'm also the mom of someone who is neurodiverse. My son is a freshman in college and thriving, and have learned a lot, frankly, through this ERG and partners like Autism Speaks, who are a great partner of ours at Stanley Black & Decker, and just how to support people as they are aging out of school and getting out into the world and getting people employed. One of our areas of focus as an ERG is updating the policy in our company, but we also have our first on-purpose hiring programs in this space. I'm very, very proud of that, really just getting started in that journey.
I love that. And I think it's important to call out for the audience that when we as D&I professionals talk about specifically neurodiverse, we do say ability. And that is the technical academic term, and it is academic for this specific diversity dimension. But Patrick, I wanted to ask you, so as an employer, what are the competitive advantages to hiring someone that's neurodiverse?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we kind of look at it as three ways. There's three major benefits. Of course, there's a benefit to the individual and their family. There's a benefit to the greater economy and society. But your question is about the company, so I think that's one that we'll jump into, and that's one we see firsthand. And as you can expect, they're broad and far-reaching. Benefits to morale, engagement, when you truly include, when you truly integrate different kinds of minds, you're getting a team that is highly motivated and dedicated. In terms of the individual working, some of the traits, and again, we're using generalizations here, but specific skill sets around honesty, attention to detail, excellent memory, reliability, structures, routines. So in manufacturing, of course, and with what we do, there's a ton of routine and structure and quality control points, things that have to be accurate, because when you're printing 10,000 or 50,000 items, someone who can spot that little error or that thing to save the company is obviously super important. From a company perspective as well, there's obviously imaging. It's better to have true DEI goals. I think one of the good things that came out of 2020 was an increased focus on DEI, but unfortunately, that focus, I think, hasn't really spread widely enough to the disabled community, and so hopefully it does that. But the main thing for us is about the individual skill sets, and they're just incredible. And we've had some of the most amazing, I could tell stories about problems being solved and things that have saved the company thousands of dollars just with someone spotting something or correcting something that most people missed, probably because they were socializing or talking or doing something over there that wasn't necessarily applicable to the, and I count myself in that, applicable to the task at hand.
It's perfect. I love that. So I'm vaguely familiar with a spelling error that went out once on a widely known t-shirt. So any other competitive edges from the team that you'd like to call out?
Yeah, I think I could add a couple of that. So Patrick mentioned some of the maybe like softer outcomes that we see, and I would add to that, it's not in terms of like the productivity, which there are numbers there, time on task, productivity, things like that. But some of the ones I like to mention, AJ, are, Microsoft talks about they've learned to become more effective managers and communicators across their entire business, thanks to their Neurodiversity, their Autism at Work program. It taught them to be direct and concise, stop wasting words, stop dancing around the point, just say what you mean, and follow up verbal conversations with written, email, or visual support. And they swear this has made them more efficient, better communicators, more concise and direct outside of that program. Now it's across the entire organization. And I think, the other piece I like to talk about is JP Morgan Chase. So these are really good people at this bank who have started this program, but man, they don't do anything that doesn't make them more money. They don't do anything that doesn't make them more efficient or more innovative. JP Morgan Chase doesn't do stuff just to say they did something nice for the community. I think it's really important that we listen to the business leaders talk about this, because everyone expects the guy from Autism Speaks to try and convince you hiring autistic people is going to be good for your bottom line. Well, if you don't believe us, listen to the banks, listen to Microsoft and SAP. Like I said, they don't do things just out of a sense of corporate social responsibility. They may try it, but it doesn't sustain itself. It doesn't grow like we've seen this grow. So those results are there, both kind of hard and soft, as I split them in my mind anyway.
And from a skill set point of view, one of the things that we talk about quite a lot in our company, that our first hiring program actually is in a manufacturing facility, one of our largest in the US, but yes, repetitive tasks, yes, attention to detail for sure, but also high levels of spatial reasoning, higher order math and analytic skills, UX and UI design, all the skills that we're hiring on a regular basis for innovation in physical products and in software products. So there's lots of opportunity across various functions and various parts of our business. We're getting started in one particular area, but we definitely plan to expand.
Can I add something real quick, if you don't mind?
Please.
So building on what she did, you're all taking it from the point of view of the competitive edge is really good. But I'm going to do a little more personal on when I walk into a factory, I experience the environment very differently. So I'm able to tell things very differently than some other workers. When I walk into a factory, I'm sorry, the rhythm of the machines really makes a difference to me. The vibrations in the floor. And while some people view this could, affect my work to a negative, it also makes me much more alert on how the system is moving. How are the machines in the factory? How is everything going? If I hear a certain rhythm, I know everything's okay. My brain sits back. But if something sort of pops up that all of a sudden there's a change in tempo or something, my brain is immediately going, okay, there's a problem. We've got a problem. Let's take care of it. And I can bring that into a manufacturing environment that a lot of other people don't realize, that those special skill sets really do allow us to bring competitive advantage. Also, a number of people who have, are special interests. Often I see some people who might be viewed as having an intellectual disability because they might have struggled in school and in that traditional thing, but they might be the expert on a particular piece of machinery. And, our machinery in factories is not like our computers where they have a lifespan of maybe a few years. Some of these people have such a breadth and depth of knowledge regarding that piece of machinery. They know how it works every time, and they know the 20 years. And that is a unique abilities that we're able to bring sometimes to the factory and into the manufacturing facility. So
it's critical. And I mean, it's something that is oftentimes immeasurable, I think, as well. So it's very, very helpful. So let's get to tactics a little bit. So what should manufacturers consider when they are rethinking their hiring process to be more inclusive? So what do they need to consider when trying to hire those that are neurodiverse?
I don't want to keep jumping us off, but I'll just throw one thing out there. Emily, I'm sorry, I saw you unmute yourself, so I'll be quick.
Start us off.
Okay, I think one of the first things we can do, and what we've seen companies do, is change the way they recruit and assess this talent. So they're not necessarily finding autistic or otherwise neurodivergent students on college campuses where companies are used to recruiting. Of course, those students are there. They're just not easily identified, and they don't have a ton of reason to disclose to you or to your recruiter when they show up on campus, right? We need to work much harder. This work to gain the trust of this community is significant. That's a part of this, to make sure that they know you're genuine. You're not here to take advantage. You are here to learn about their strengths and to really leverage them and to welcome them and embrace them. Part of a way you can do that, I think, is understanding that the traditional interview has failed us, not just in the neurodiverse community. I think for all of us, we're hiring people for the wrong jobs all the time because they perform well in an artificial social situation, right? If we think about, we don't have to only think about autism, but challenges with communication and social interaction are the hallmarks of this one condition we're talking about. Why are we going to use and rely this old way of assessing talent that we know doesn't really bring us the best candidates all the time? So some of those other companies they're being really creative when they can. They spend weeks on assessments, but the traditional, the common thread is get away from these artificial social situations and assign actual work tasks that you're going to hire the person to perform. It's really simple, but it's made a huge difference in some of these autism at work or neurodiversity hiring programs. Sorry, Emily, please take it over.
No, that's great. And I would just add to that, I think is a compliment is even before thinking about your process and adjusting the process, you should really take a step back and think about the environment and the people that this new hire is joining, and whether that's you're ready as an organization, whether their colleagues, the supervisors, that environment is inclusive to begin with, because otherwise this person that's coming in won't be set up to be successful. And in particular at Special Olympics, we have a training and curriculum. We do quite a bit with our Special Olympics athletes, but recently we've also really realized that it's not enough to just prepare people who are neurodiverse for opportunities, because we can't anymore ask them to just sort of fit into the norm that's currently there, whether it's the interview process or whether it's onboarding or whether it's in the job, we have to also look at that environment they're going into and those leaders who are there and work with them and say, what's said about this? Are you open to people who are neurodivergent or who have, in our case, an intellectual developmental disability? Do you understand the behaviors you currently have in your job? And are you open to adjusting those to be more inclusive? So we think about it kind of in both ways, both in the process and adjusting that, both in the recruitment of the potential new hires, and then the colleagues and the supervisors and the environment they're coming into is really also a critical starting point before you even think about bringing on people.
It's amazing. Tracy, I think you had something to add too.
I was just going to say, and as we get started on our journey, we're working closely with Autism Speaks and another partner, and our journey is, first of all, sourcing the areas and the company that have the greatest readiness, the greatest willingness to move in this direction, and then helping folks understand that we're not creating jobs for people with disabilities. We have jobs and skills that we need, and people with special abilities or disabilities can fill those jobs aptly well. People policies and practices, so the talent sourcing piece of this, the training that we're going to be providing both for the talent sourcing organization, so our HR folks in that facility, as well as the hiring managers in that facility, so they know what to look for, again, how to go through an interview and what to expect through that interview. Eye contact and handshakes aren't really the way that we should be judging folks more broadly, and not in this area as well. And we have an engagement that will stay, that is active through actually a year period of time. So we're going to be training, we're hiring, and then we're assessing, hey, what are we learning and what can we do differently? And the success, hopefully, that we'll see off the back of that will be used as a use case for other parts of the organization, other functions, and other manufacturing facilities, hopefully.
And I'd like to add something to Tracy. One of the things is we're talking about interviewing, but what is most interesting to me is retaining. Getting them in the door is nice, but keeping them there. Manufacturing actually is one of the few positions that we can also work on saying there are career opportunities. It's not just you're here for a few years, you move on. But the retaining is really important. Okay, so doing everything we can for interviewing is great, but if you're not creating an environment that helps retain them, it's sort of a waste of effort. And to retain them, you basically, our thing in either with interviewing or anything, it's have you prepared your managers and your frontline supervisors, and have you prepared your coworkers? And this again, and I'll mention later on, why manufacturing is so perfectly positioned right now to be able to do some pretty amazing things in this field. And I'll explain later on why I believe that. So.
Okay, so let's talk about accommodations. And Anne, I am going to call on you for this, and we're seeing this pop up in the chat as well, but what accommodations should manufacturers be considering to retain neurodiverse employees?
Yeah, if I can just, because I like the retention. I think, Anne, you're 100% right. Retention is really where the rubber meets the road. And one of the things, and I don't know if you would even consider this an accommodation, but one of the things we found to be very successful is our head of HR is also a licensed master social worker. And I actually think, as with everything, when you make these adjustments, they actually benefit everyone and improve everything, because you've now got someone who's a real expert in mental health. Mental health is something that affects everyone, right? And so, but also can particularly be skilled and knowledgeable with our neurodiverse employees and help with things like executive functioning, training managers, changing communication across the company to make it more visual. And so I think from a people point of view, we found that to be a great model. Having someone who's really trained in, HR really is about people. So like having someone who's trained in people and the mind and mental health, I think is really important. And then other things we do are really simple in terms of actual workplace. We don't even really call them accommodations. They're kind of adaptations to make things more efficient. just making the place more visual. We put footprints on the floor where people should stand in work areas. We've numbered heads. We've paired images with machines so that if you can say to someone, okay, that's the screen print 8-station Diamondback, but there's a picture of an octopus next to it. So you can see the two and pair it and just go to the octopus, instead of going, that's the 8-station, blah, 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 right? So those things have really improved. We haven't, necessarily done hard data on it, but we think around 30% improvement in efficiency. And obviously in the world of manufacturing, this is all very, very possible. And then my last thing I think of is in terms of like making the visual workplace more effective is when you're on an airplane and you have to get off it in an emergency, that panel in the back of the seat, that instruction manual is cartoons. It's all visual because you need to be able to do things quickly and efficiently. It's not verbal. It's not, point here and there. Everyone needs to be able to understand that. And I think that's a real example of why making things more visual is not necessarily an accommodation, but it's an adaptation that makes the place more efficient and better for everyone.
And what Patrick's describing there is the concept of universal design. So if we build well for everyone, if we build well and take that into account, we can do that. And we're working at that internally in different divisions at Autism Speaks. So we even know the challenges that derives. Regarding on what kind of accommodations should manufacturers consider? Boy, as an industrial engineer, I would like nothing more than to be able to give you a laundry list of workplace accommodations for neurodiverse employees because it would be so easy. But unfortunately, that's not how neurodivergent conditions work. There is just way too much variation in how the conditions affect each person to use blanket accommodations. When it comes to sensory issues, manufacturers are already understand environmental accommodations. Okay, we've been doing those for a long time. Manufacturers are also way ahead of other industries when it comes to communication accommodations. And that is because of the wide variety of languages spoken in many plants. One of the first questions I ask when I go into a plant to evaluate is, how many languages do you speak here? And when they say 7, 4, even, just 2, that's great because that fluidity of communication environments really causes employees to be creative in sharing information. And this is great for neurodiverse population, okay? So many plants have already created diverse communication workplaces. They just haven't figured out that is a great advantage that they can use with neurodiverse populations. Most accommodations regarding neurodiversity are not necessarily handled on that HR level. They're handled by the floor supervisors and coworkers. And simple workplace accommodations or adjustments that create a friendly environment for neurodiverse employees can make a difference, and they aren't that expensive. And these include supports for the brain's processes in both learning and communication adjustments. Okay, so right now, I am using a variety of accommodations. My autism manifests in my speech, and facilitated discussions like this one are not always easy for me. So comedian Hannah Gadsby, who happens to be autistic, described her autistic experience as, in the real world, I struggle to talk to people because my neurodiversity makes it difficult for me to think, listen, speak, and process new information all at the same time, okay? That describes me. And so to accommodate my communication issues, I ask my hosts for questions ahead of time. Something I now do in every job interview I will ever do now, because I found how wonderful it is. I plan my responses. And right now, I'm not thinking, listening, speaking, and processing new information all the time. I'm reading a script that I wrote, and I'm reading it out loud. And because of the technology, I don't have to worry too much about eye contact. Now, if I was sitting in your office for a job interview, I wouldn't be making eye contact. To process all the information, my brain will automatically slows down my visual inputs, limiting my eye contact, okay? You gotta love automation, and I tend to make contact when I'm speaking, but when you're speaking, I look away so that my brain can focus on your words and make sure that I'm understanding the audio, okay? That is what many accommodations are. They're simple adjustments to manager and coworker behavior. And this is really the front line of creating a neurodiverse and friendly workplace. Now, the accommodation that the HR department might be interested in is I often use a trusted person. And today my colleague Dave is here, and Dave can read people's facial expressions, so I don't have to. He can perceive tone in a way my brain just doesn't. And so basically I trust Dave, and I tend to outsource some of my brain's communication work to Dave, okay? Now, there still are some structural corporate issues in like the hiring process and training programs and job designs that can keep neurodiverse job seekers out of the workplace. But those issues are also barriers for other groups, including women and minorities and military veterans. And those are a bigger issue we have to tackle. But if you do want a laundry list of individual accommodations, the Job Accommodation Network provides suggestions on a number of neurodiverse conditions. And that's where I recommend. But a lot of times the accommodations, when we say accommodations, don't think scary, expensive, legal things. Think about just how you're communicating. So now I'm going to pass back to Adrian. Thank you.
I think what's interesting, and what you just said, is a lot of it is addressing the unconscious biases, which for those that have joined these panels before, it is a common theme that we are reiterating every discussion we have. And that's what you're addressing truly, is when we're talking about accommodations, is how are we adapting as fellow colleagues, as employees, as bosses, managers, all the above, some of our thought patterns. Very, very insightful. I love that. Dave, I think you had something to add.
I was at the ready to talk about the Job Accommodation Network, and then Anne nailed it. So I just put it in the chat. The other thing I just wanted to add is Anne made a point about this, but sometimes we get nervous. The legal department or your accounting department about, well, how much is this going to cost? Oh, the accommodations sound really legalistic and like scary. The vast majority, like more than 90% of these kinds of adjustments cost $0, nothing. We're talking about like lowering the lights, may even save you money. And then the 10% that do cost, the average is $500. Not going to break the bank. It's well worth the investment. So like these are not scary things. There are creative ideas that end up serving all of us, as Patrick has touched on, and Anne about the universal accommodation idea. It is absolutely true. We're all benefiting at Autism Speaks by getting better, because we recognize we had our own work to do, right, to become more accepting and embracing of all of these differences, and it's benefiting all of us, whether we're autistic or otherwise neurodiverse or we're neurotypical. So we're living the example right now, and we hope to be able to impart that to our partners going forward.
So let's get into the other side. What are some challenges that manufacturers could expect when they're trying to change their hiring process, consider employing and retaining neurodiverse persons? What challenges should they expect? And have you, Patrick and Tracy too, have you experienced? Or none?
Look, whenever you're hiring people, there's going to be challenges, right? Because people are not machines. And so there is that saying, that one person on the autism spectrum and one person on the autism spectrum. So, and it's the same thing with people. So I think those your usual challenges are there with hiring, but I would just say, I think most of the challenges we've experienced would be with managers, actually, and not necessarily with the individual, but with making sure that the managers are on board and those trainings. And often those things, they end up kind of weeding themselves out. With regards to the individual, specific cases would be mostly the softer skills, which, I don't think they're certainly teachable, but executive functioning, sometimes we've had experiences with those kinds of things, but those are easily taught. Okay, we need to set an alarm, or, if you're going to be late and things like that, or if it's dress code and stuff like that. It's all soft skills that aren't necessarily major hurdles. And we've been able to, just with natural supports, kind of teach around them. I can't really think of any particular examples of major hurdles that were directly to do with hiring someone, who's neurodivergent. I really think that it's mostly dealing with people. and the wonderful differences that we all have in that sense.
I completely agree. We've done summer internship programs specifically focused on neurodiverse candidates, and the success or not of those candidates' experience was not unlike the success or not of candidates in general. Was the hiring manager prepared? Did we have a really good plan for their course of work? We had amazing experiences. We had one experience where the hiring manager didn't have as solid and structured a plan. Perhaps that was a little bit more difficult for a neurodiverse candidate than it would have been for not, but generally speaking, you got to be organized and you got to be ready to have new humans come on board wherever they're coming from. So I think for me and for us, it's very much about just providing the education and also dispelling a little bit of the fear. If you haven't had an experience with disability more broadly in your life, so many of us have, but a lot of us haven't, giving people the words to use or not use in situations so they feel comfortable that they're not going to say the wrong thing, those things are really important as well.
If I could add a couple, and I know I'm not from the manufacturer side, but just from our experience, there's a few barriers that maybe businesses want to think about. And one is transportation. This is affecting all of these folks of neurodiversities. Some will drive absolutely. Some will have no problem accessing public transportation to get to work. A lot of people, it won't be so simple. And we've seen employers be willing to get creative about sharing shuttles to the bus station, for instance, the bus stop, or to the train station to help people in this way, or partnering up with local nonprofit community organizations who might be able to offer that kind of shuttle service. Another one that I maybe want to tee up unexpectedly, Anne, so don't feel pressure, you don't have to, but something we've noticed is job descriptions can be utterly meaningless. And we have this problem too, right? Like every job requires, some sort of communication ability and teamwork, and it really means nothing. And what it might do though is unintentionally discourage neurodiverse people from ever applying. They may say, geez, I can't fill this need, or I have a real challenge with this kind of social skill. And it was never needed for the position in the first place. It was literally cut and paste onto every job description for the company. That happens all the time. So there are things that we're doing that might unintentionally discourage people. And does that set you up to add anything?
Yeah, I was going to add, I am a big proponent of skills-based job descriptions. They're easier to implement in a manufacturing environment because, well, one, you have a whole group of industrial engineers who are trained how to write skills-based and measure skills-based. White-collar workforce is a total mess when it comes to defining what their skills are. But that also might be a benefit. You're not the only manufacturer. When we look at neurodiverse and we think we have this huge pot of all these people who are just saying, to be quite honest, it's a very competitive landscape too right now, we're finding. Most people think of them only as technical, but then when we start branching out, the number of companies are approaching us, and they're not approaching us because they want to, it's Autism Awareness Month and they want to be, they're approaching us because they need employees. Okay. And everyone's fighting for employees right now. And manufacturing, because you use skills-based, because it is tough to get to a location, but it's pretty much, the job is pretty self-explanatory in that you can say, this is what we do. We produce this. You can control some of your social interactions. I mean, there's so much that can really be useful for someone who is having neurodiverse issues, but also just that ability to explain exactly, these are the skills we need. Because I'm what's called a bottom-up thinker, okay? I don't see a forest, I see a tree, okay? So it sometimes takes me a lot of time to try to interpret what a job description means. But if I know exactly what the skill set is, and it's laid out there, it's much easier for me to approach jobs. And it encourages people to apply for those jobs when they know exactly what skills they need to have. So
Which are better for the broader population as well, and like skills-based job descriptions is what we should be
I
aiming
know.
for, full stop.
Yes, I am a big proponent of that. And we'll see how far HR embraces that as we slowly bring them along to our thinking. And this is another thing people don't realize. Manufacturing will lead the future in this. We're beginning to see tech doing more, but manufacturing leads in skill-based, skills-based job descriptions already. Manufacturing is so well positioned for this, but we also do need to really work on convincing parents and other people that manufacturing is a good job.
Mm-hmm.
So.
If AJ, sorry, I promise I'll stop butting in, but there was one more thing I wanted to mention, and it's the reason why like Special Olympics and Autism Speaks and Best Buddies were all teaming up together on this Delivering Jobs initiative, where we're all kind of on the same team here. We all have the same goal. And what I wanted to say, part of the reason for Delivering Jobs is there's not this ready pipeline. Like we know there are millions of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities or differences, neurological differences, who are ready and willing to work, but they're not all readily accessible. They're not all waiting to apply. We have some work to do to kind of build this movement, to build momentum, to build trust, I think, that we are going to serve them well and that these employers are going to serve and support them well. So that's part of this. It's building awareness, building excitement, and not just on the business side. I think it's important for our constituents who we serve to know this is for real and to know that we're really pushing for 1 million jobs and 1 million jobs and leadership opportunities by the year 2025. And that's our goal. It needs both sides of the equation to work.
Perfect. Do you want to give an overview of Delivering Jobs since you mentioned?
I won't waste too much more time, but I think I kind of covered it. It's the 3 organizations, and the group that's hurting us cats, which is a hard job, is the Entertainment Industry Foundation, who you might know from Stand Up to Cancer. So really what Delivering Jobs is about is that campaign. Let's get senior executives, CEOs, C-suite executives who recognize the business case for hiring neurodiverse individuals, not out of charity, but to help make that case and to help drive the movement that we really need. We're seeing very high unemployment and underemployment rates. We haven't really touched on this yet, but like our community is suffering, folks. We're seeing high, 80%, 90% estimates around the world. This is the urgency that we're bringing to you. I know it's been a very positive conversation, but there is a kind of a dark side to this conversation where most people with disabilities that we're talking about are not working at great companies. They're actually at home and they're disconnected and they're isolated. So we have a lot of work to do, and that's. I just want to make sure we're not leaving that part of the story out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, David, you're right. Even more, I've read recently that 1 in 5 since the pandemic have lost those precious few jobs. So you're right. This is urgent, and as insult to injury, a lot of those jobs were essential worker tasks. And it's just like, yeah, it's tough. So I think that's an important point to highlight. There is a big sense of urgency here.
Emily, I'd like to ask, so what are the first steps that need to be taken for a company that wants to increase the hiring and retaining of neurodiversity?
Sure, and I'm sitting here learning so much from all of you and taking notes and thinking about all these connection points. And I'll answer that question absolutely, and then tie a few things together if I can. So when you start thinking about the readiness, and I mentioned that that's something that we do at Special Olympics, is a process in partnership with organizations to really work them through an education series where they can begin with sort of this breaking down barriers, understanding their unconscious bias, these assumptions. I think that's a really important one, is sort of breaking outside of what you think this is and who you think we're talking about. And one way to do that is to meet people who are neurodivergent, interact with people. Dave mentioned a number of organizations, our Special Olympics included, who are available to meet with you, to do activities together. I think that's really critical for your employees, for your supervisors, to start to think about what's possible. And that's really part of what our introductory series is sort of You're learning from our athletes, I should mention. They are the teachers, just like we're learning so much from Anne and her perspective. You're learning from people who are neurodifferent, and you're hearing directly from them on what's possible and so forth. And when you think about that assumption and breaking down that assumption, it kind of leads you to that general comment we heard before. Don't just hire someone because you want to say that you have someone who's neurodifferent. Make sure that you have a thorough job description, as it's skill-based, which was mentioned is really important, and that there's going to be a value added, because you have to set that up from the beginning and then support them throughout. And I would say that goes all the way to accountability. I think too often I've seen when you set it up not as something that's value added to the organization, perhaps leaning more into tokenism, then you're not holding them accountable. Then that feeling of contribution from that individual lowers, and all of a sudden you're just creating an environment that is not sustainable, that doesn't support future hiring of people who are different. And so from job description, value added, all the way through accountability, which could include, this isn't the right fit. And that's okay. That's what we do with all of our employees. We need to be honest about that. And one thing I'd add as far as an adjustment or support in the middle is to really think tactically, think about job training, sort of use this task analysis approach and saying, what are the skills for this job? And map it out. What are the knowledge and skills they need to do that responsibility? And then kind of like a checklist. Do you have that skill? Do you have that knowledge? And set them up to really understand this is exactly what we expect of you. And really, really critical, we heard this from Patrick and others, is an ongoing check-in, not just with the employee, with their teammates, with the supervisor, so everybody feels supported. One thing we've experienced is teammates aren't interacting with the person who's neurodiverse because they don't know how, they don't know what to do. So you're creating this divide before you've even given anybody a chance. And I think that open communication, that ongoing check-in is really helpful for everybody. So hopefully that I gave you sort of a full spectrum of engagement, but I think sort of having that when you go into it is really critical. It's a whole, multiple step process to make sure they're successful and that ultimately the organization is successful.
I love that. Yeah, I think you handled that well. And please.
Okay. Just look inside your own company. Okay. The prevalence of neurodiverse conditions is, pretty high. If you have over 100 employees, you're going to have someone whose life has been touched by dyslexia or learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, autism, things like that. The companies that we see that are making the best progress, it's usually by efforts that are driven by family members who have people who are neurodiverse, who say, hey, you know what? Have you ever thought about a kid who can do this? Or have you ever thought about an employee who does this? Or, that's when it is when they start making the company start looking within of, hey, we can, we have these jobs that are available, but we need to maybe structure the training, the interview, structure our support within the among coworkers a little differently. But that often is where we see the best results, because it is from within. And we call them champions, because once you identify your champions, you are in such great position, because now you already have an internal source that's working and that can help guide you and help support your efforts. So
I would add, if I could use Tracy and Stanley Black & Decker as a model, I think what we see is this effective kind of grassroots campaign that's pushed up from the ERG. And the ERG at Stanley Black & Decker, it's not just people who are neurodiverse or neurodivergent or people with different conditions. It's also family members. So allies, parents like Tracy and others who are going to push up kind of from the grassroots, but then you match it with an executive champion who can bring along legal and, the budget and HR, whatever else you might need. That's the kind of meeting that we've seen be really effective. And it starts, as Anne said, ask your own workforce. Who's affected by this? Who wants to push this forward within the company? You're gonna find people if you ask.
And if I can add to that executive sponsorship for a moment, that is so important. If you're talking about a large organization, we are blessed to have two leaders who report to our CEO who are co-executive sponsors, very influential in the company and their jobs more broadly, but they have really helped us move along the maturity curve, I think, much faster than had we only been grassroots.
This is a fantastic, I know we're butting up against time, but this is a fantastic conversation. I do want to ask one final question, and that is resources. I know we've seen and shared some in the chat, but I'm thinking for those listening, what are the best things for them to go to? Toolkits and, obviously the Job Accommodation Network, but where should they go to start?
I'll plug, well, first, deliveringjobs.org. From there, you can find Autism Speaks, Special Olympics, and Best Buddies, and all of our programs. So if you're gonna go to one place, I'd say Delivering Jobs. And just one selfish plug, at Autism Speaks, we have a new program called Workplace Inclusion Now, or WIN. That's our training, education, consulting work, all kind of under one package. Thanks to my colleague, Josh, so the link is in there. But I know Emily has others, and there's wonderful other organizations, by the way. Tracy has mentioned NOD, National Organization on Disability. There are others out there doing really excellent work too.
Any other resources that anybody had that is important, or we have it covered? I see all these links.
Jeff Schwartz, yeah, there's Best Buddies. So I'll add one more. So the Job Accommodation Network is a really good one. There's a similar one called EARN that's also funded by the Department of Labor. And this is more on the employer assistance side. So this is for, corporate, I think the legal team to talk to. There's case studies about how some of these initiatives have launched. It's similar to Jan, where they can offer free consulting. They'll talk to you and it's confidential.
Perfect. Well, I know we're at a time, but this was a great conversation, and we've just skimmed the surface. So thank you all truly, truly so much for participating today and sharing your expertise and knowledge. And thank you for everyone listening. And if you would like to learn more, always feel free to email us. I'm sure we can connect you with any of the panelists as well, but we will have a case study specifically on delivering jobs, I believe, up early next week. So please feel free to reach out, and thank you again so much to our panelists for participating today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.